Greetings, everybody. My name is Janice Cheesem. I'm honored to be the president of CISF and especially honored to welcome you to this, our industrial call via Zoom, honoring and featuring prime industrial owners in real estate. I'll take just a minute to thank all of the members of CISF in supporting these efforts, and especially to thank our sponsors, Colliers, Duke Realty, Terreno Realty, Miller Construction, Ackerman, ProLogis, Terracon Group, Pathman Lewis, Carlos Diaz Architecture, and Regent Security. Without further ado, let me turn this over to our moderator, Sebastian Juncadella.
Thank you, Janice. So as an introduction, I see a lot of familiar faces. For those who do not know me, my name is Sebastian Juncadella. I'm with Fairchild Partners. We're a commercial real estate brokerage firm down here in South Florida, and I'm lucky enough to work primarily on industrial space these days. Wanted to do kind of a quick introduction of our panelists, just to kind of set the stage. I'll let them be more formal in a moment, but Stephanie Rodriguez with Duke Realty. I'm sure all of us know Stephanie. She's very involved in the community, definitely a community leader in the sense that she's actively involved with NAIOP, CIASF. She's VP of Leasing and Development for Duke. And just as a kind of an informal plug, I've learned that if Stephanie is copied in an email or if she gets copied later on, whatever project you're working on, if it's a deal, if it's an event like this, you're fine. It's going to work out for the best. And Janice will probably kill me for saying that. But if you either have Janice or Stephanie copied, it's going to come out just fine. So thank you, Stephanie, for being involved here. Next, we have Jason Tenenbaum, who, although I have never met in person, he is the VP and Market Officer for ProLogis down here. He is replacing Scott Gregory. Jason comes from the Northeast, and if anyone knows about international or national industrial markets, the Northeast is certainly a challenging market, but I think they are, you know, moving him to perhaps a more challenging market down here in South Florida with our high barriers to entry, our lack of land, and occasionally a language barrier as well. So Jason, welcome, and I know that I speak for all the brokers on this call. We're excited to work with you moving forward. And then finally, we have Ross Giglio, who, besides being a good personal friend, is VP at Terreno. He's joining us from San Francisco. What my father and I like to say is Terreno was buying and here in South Florida before it was cool. So they've been in this market for a long time, own a variety of different asset classes across the U.S., and Ross himself is a very cool, calm, collected individual. I've been in many due diligence with him where I was hitting the panic button and Ross figured it out. So very honored to have this group here, definitely leaders and you know, movers and shakers in our market in regards to industrial ownership. But with that sort of soft intro, I would like to open it up to Stephanie, Jason, and Ross to give ourselves a more formal introduction of your organization, a little bit about your firm's holdings across the U.S. and also here in South Florida and your role within the organization. So ladies first, Stephanie, if you don't mind kicking us off.
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Stephanie Rodriguez, and Sebastian introduced me already. I'm our local market leader for Duke Realty here in South Florida, and I'm responsible for overseeing our leasing and development in the market. We currently have 8.5 million square feet of all industrial in the Tri-County area, and we continue to grow that footprint. So my job is to make sure that the lease deals get executed and that we find growth opportunities within South Florida. Overall, Duke is a publicly traded company. We own exclusively industrial real estate in the United States, and we are in 21 markets nationally. So I'm fortunate to be positioned in one of our high growth targeted markets, you know, the tier 1 coastal regions. So it means I have a lot of fun playing with finding ways to spend money for the company. So that's me and my role in a nutshell.
Jason?
Great. Thanks to the CIASF for having me, and this is my first panel and first real meeting. So you know, thanks for including me, and look forward to meeting everyone over the months and years to come. ProLogis, similar, a publicly traded REIT, just a little bit different statistics. Nationally and really globally, we own about 963 million square feet, which is just a tremendous number. 1,700 employees, 5,500 customers, and we're in 4 different continents. Locally for us, we have about 20 million square feet among 187 buildings, which accounts to about 600 tenants, or as we call customers. I am Jason Tenenbaum, the VP and Market Officer here in South Florida, overseeing Miami-Dade and Broward and our holdings in Palm Beach. And yeah, so I just moved here 3 months ago from New Jersey. I've been with ProLogis for a handful of years up there, so a little bit new to the market, but pretty familiar with ProLogis and some of the players here on the phone. So look forward to speaking with everyone.
Great. Ross?
Yeah, Ross Giglio, Terreno Realty. So we're also a publicly traded REIT based out of San Francisco. Have been kind of running our portfolio from here, and most people probably haven't heard, but we are opening actually a second office right now up in the Seattle area. So kind of Terreno going from tiny little company to lower middle-sized company right now. Certainly much smaller than the other two panelists here, but we're nationally in 6 markets around the country. So on the West Coast, that's LA, Bay Area, and Seattle. And the East Coast being New York, New Jersey, Washington, D.C., and Miami, South Florida. We have across the country right around 14 million square feet. Always been a very kind of infill, usually older building rehab kind of strategy. And in Miami in particular, just under 1.5 million square feet, all of Miami-Dade County right now. We'll see in the future if we end up in Broward a little further up north, but been kind of very, very, very region focused within the submarkets. Companies headed by former AMB executives who started in 2010 as a public company. So it's been around a little while now. And I've been here 6 years. We have in our roles as kind of VPs at the company, we do the leasing asset management side of it, as well as the acquisition side of it. So, I've come across a number of you in various capacities, but if you're working any kind of leasing activity or acquisition work, we'll be in touch directly, I'm sure, on that. So nice to meet everyone here.
Great. And thank you to the 3 of you for the intro. So, the main reason we're having these video calls and obviously, we've, it's definitely a topic that it seems that we hammer to death in the sense that it starts and prefaces every conversation is obviously COVID and how it's affected us. We know how it's affected us on a personal level, but I think it would be only appropriate to start this conversation with just asking our panelists a little bit concretely how your role and perhaps how you've seen the industry change in the past 6 months. For a lot of us here on the micro level, it's important to understand what's happening in a bigger scale. So if you would like to start, and whoever would like to take that question, what you've seen concretely change in the past 6 months. A lot of it may be obvious, but kind of your perspective on these changes.
Yeah, I'm happy to.
Go for it, Ross. Go.
This is the problem with Zoom calls, right? No, I was just gonna quickly say I've sort of seen remarkably little has changed compared to what we thought was going to be happening at this point in the industrial sector. I think occupancy and activity has remained and held fairly strong, and kind of waiting for the other shoe to drop in a way, but things have sort of been held together up till now. Definitely expecting more dislocation in the future in the coming months. Some of this government support kind of winds down, but I think in terms of concrete change, I mean, the interesting one I've noticed is really more new players in trying to get into the industrial space. And, we find ourselves competing on new deals, at or above prior to COVID pricing with, parties who have not historically been large investors in that space. So that's been an interesting shift and something that I think support and values even in face of a lot of uncertainty.
Yeah, I can piggyback off of that a little. I think that, you know, we went into this pandemic so highly occupied, especially if we're focusing on, you know, if we look at South Florida in general, our vacancy rates were so low. So we had a little bit of a cushion there. I think we saw a little bit of a slowdown in trigger pull on spec development starts for, you know, the last, let's say 6 months. You know, Duke announced that we were going to put a pause on our spec development pipeline in the wake of the COVID pandemic. And, you know, Jason can probably chime in that ProLogis sort of made that same announcement initially. So I think that is one of the changes that we saw, where we were kind of going full steam ahead, and then all of a sudden March came and we were like pumping the brakes a little bit. I think that, you know, one of the changes in my role is where I'm usually out trying to make deals. We were cutting different kinds of deals for a little while there, and just really staying in front of all of our customers, talking to them about what they're going through and how their businesses are doing during, you know, this time. And like Ross just said, I think that we're all in this, we're still in a wait and see approach to see what happens once, you know, the PPP funding has run out, or some of the other assistance that those businesses have been able to get, how that's going to look going forward, because we're still not, you know, 100%, obviously. So we've shifted more to sort of an asset management role rather than the deal maker role, I think. And, you know, we certainly saw some slowdown in deal velocity, especially on, you know, some of the smaller deals that we were working. So, you know, that's sort of the initial short-term changes that I've had to kind of witness so far.
Yeah, and I'd kind of echo some of those sentiments. I mean, I think we're in the state of this COVID confusion, and the market's still not really sure what to make of it all. For every call we get that's bad news, that a customer might need to give back some space or really just can't make rent payments, somebody else picks up the phone and calls us that they need more space, or they need a new location. So we're getting a little bit of this push and pull, good news and bad news, which is just this state of confusion. But, you know, and I think the obvious is this has been an accelerant to the e-commerce world. Over the past 10 years, we've seen really slow e-commerce growth, probably a percentage point per year, just as far as kind of the conversion from e-commerce purchases to retail purchases. And over the past 3 months, I think that's accelerated kind of 10 times. So 10 years of growth historically has happened over the past 3 months, where we've seen that kind of jump up from 15 to 25%. So, you know, I think there's some optimism there, but there's still this world of confusion where some of our smaller customers and some other industries are still trying to figure out what the future looks like and when we're going to be out of this thing.
That's great. And I guess now looking forward, you know, this is the part of the call where we ask you to take out the crystal ball. You know, we anticipate that we should have a vaccine in the next maybe 6 months, and hopefully things start transitioning back to normal. Where do you think we will be 12 months from now? And I asked that question with the lens of concretely in South Florida. How do you think South Florida industrial demand will be 12 months from today? You know, hopefully things have progressed. Hopefully we're having these meetings in person. Where do you think we will be at that point?
I can go first on this one. I think that over the next 12 months, we'll see sort of some flat rents. You know, prior to the shelter in place, I think we were all pushing rent growth tremendously in the market. I think that, I don't think we're going to see a step back, but I certainly don't think we're going to see those huge, you know, leaps up that we had been seeing historically. I think that our market is a lot different from a lot of other, you know, industrial distribution markets throughout the country, in that our tenants tend to be smaller in size. So within our portfolio, our average tenant size is like 45,000 square feet. So some of those smaller tenants, you know, maybe not as well capitalized and may not have, you know, the balance sheets to support them through whatever long-term, you know, hangover we have from this going forward. So we might see some of those spaces coming back, or, you know, ghost spaces hitting sublease markets. But then to counter that, I think that, like Jason said, this uptick in the e-commerce demand, these shopping habits have shifted tremendously, and I don't think will revert. I think people are getting accustomed to having their groceries delivered, right? The convenience of it, it's one less thing they have to deal with. I click, 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 and all of a sudden it shows up at my house. So I think that the e-grocery demand, the e-commerce demand in general, I think we'll see a lot more of a demand in this market for some of those companies looking for space last mile, really close to the rooftops of their customers so that they can get those deliveries out rapidly. So they may absorb some of those smaller spaces at the same time. So I'm hopeful, cautiously optimistic that we won't see a huge uptick in vacancy in the next 12 months, but I think we're going to see a little bit of that ebb and flow happening. I don't think we're completely insulated from losing some folks in the next 12 months.
Yeah, I think absolutely right on the trends accelerating towards everything that we've been focused on industrial wise in a pretty major way. But when you go 30+% increases in unemployment, when you have the GDP contracting the way it has, these are going to be multiple years before you're back to full economy where it used to be. So there's definitely going to be disruption. We expect softening rent and tenants going bankrupt at a higher rate than before. Just on our bad debt reserve as a small example, nationally used to be in the 20 to 30 basis points of total rent income. Now we're at about 200 basis points. So still a very relatively small number, but a large increase. Very strong compared to other sectors in the real estate world, but you do have that increase that is real out there. Long term, very, very bullish on South Florida, in particular with tax policy heading where it is in New York, and very similarly in California, to the benefit of places like South Florida, Texas, Washington State. I think you're going to have continued population growth and continued infill demand for real estate, but there's going to be some noise getting there.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think the population growth is an interesting one too. I think, people from, New Yorkers to New Jerseyers like me are going to move down here and, seek some warmer weather. And I think we're going to see that, that change happening. People that don't need to be in Manhattan and can operate business in different places. But yeah, I'm probably a little bit more pessimistic on just finding a vaccine. And what that really looks like and how that really impacts us, to get approvals and to get it through everything it needs to, and just to see how effective it is. I mean, probably this time next year, be hopeful if that happens. And then we need to distribute that through the globe. And there's 7 billion people on this planet, if not more. How we distribute that, how we create that, that's going to take some time too. So, we've seen vacancy drop in Q2, vacancy went up in Q2. I think we'll probably continue to see that at a slow pace over the next couple quarters. But I think the three of us here on the panel, we're lucky we have great portfolios, really good buildings and good sought after locations. So hopefully we'll even see some customers taking a flight to quality into our buildings. And I think just because of the type of portfolio we have, we'll be isolated from some of that kind of negativity or some of that negative vacancy we see. But, so far we're seeing rents hold pretty true. So hopeful that'll continue in the right direction. And, I think we're all hopeful we get out of this sooner than later, but it just feels like it's here to stay for the next 12 to 18 months.
Great points. And Ross, this is a question more related to you. Stephanie mentioned the smaller bay, and I know that when we had Jason's interview, he talked about one of the primary differences in the market that he previously covered in the Northeast as compared to South Florida was our tenant size. We pat ourselves on the back here for doing a 30,000 square foot deal, while Jason may have considered that small bay product up in his previous market. So what have you seen? I know that Terreno owns a lot of small bay. It's something that we've seen with capital partners. There's a little bit of a shyness, if you will, to approach that. Have you seen that product has suffered more in regards to collection of rent and default as compared to some of your larger product in regards to tenant sizes?
I haven't seen too much of a directional correlation between size and defaults. We have bigger tenants that have had issues if they're in the airline, repair and maintenance kind of services area. Garment industry has problems, and you have big tenants in those spaces. So I think it's more so distributed based on the industry, it seems to me, than on the size of the unit. I mean, our average unit in South Florida is 25,000 feet. But that's not, our usual units, either, 5 or 10 or north of 50. So I think on the smaller stuff though, any kind of like the other panelists were saying, any issue we have with the tenant going bankrupt or closing down or not being able to pay rent is been mitigated so far by a tenant saying, I need to expand or I need to get in this building. And the people that are looking to move right now generally are ones that really need to, because their business is actually growing. If they're, we have examples of tenants where they used to distill spirits and now they've converted into hand sanitizer, and they just need to, they got a contract for 1 million units. They need to meet tomorrow, so they need to expand right away. That, that kind of thing. Emergency services and materials, very, very strong demand right now. So really everything's so far has been mitigated by new demand. We have, currently just one vacancy in all of our portfolio in Miami, 5,000 square foot unit at MITC. So if you have any tenants, let us know, anyone on the call here. But we're pretty happy with the resiliency so far in the portfolio, and it's really just been sector specific from what I've seen.
That's great. And I was going to ask this later on, but you mentioned a distillery kind of transitioning into hand sanitizer. For Stephanie and Jason, have you guys seen, and Ross too, have you guys seen any sort of new concepts, perhaps a user that previously you would think, this is not a normal industrial tenant, where now kind of in the last 6 months, because of the COVID pandemic, you've seen, hey, this is a viable user. They're very well capitalized and they're making, hand over foot. Any sort of interesting concepts that you've seen that might be interesting for our audience to learn about?
Nobody's jumping
Go
on
ahead,
this one.
Stephanie.
I don't know if it's really so much interesting concepts as much as it is some of our customers are completely modifying their business model. So, where we may have somebody who distributes food product to the hospitality or travel industry in general, to cruise ships and things like that, they're now opening up sales to the public. So I have one tenant in Hialeah that they sell meats and breads and different things. And they've opened up all of their sales, at wholesale prices to the general public, just to keep their business, humming along. So I've seen quite a few of those types of examples where people have sort of shifted the way they're transacting business, but not really kind of going into new product lines or anything. They're just trying to get creative with ways to generate revenues to keep their doors open until this has passed.
Yeah, no real, shocking examples really jump out to me, but I think it's exactly that point. The conversations we had with our customers back in March and April, for, just some of the uncertainty at the time, we were hopeful this thing would only be here for a couple weeks or a couple months and it would pass over and it would be back to normal. Our conversations are changing now for some of those struggling customers. If it's here to stay for the next 12 to 18 months, what's your business plan? You can't just wait for the cruise industry to open back up. You need to be able to pivot and have, something that's going to work and bring in some cash flow. We have one example where a customer depended on the cruise industry. They were actually doing printing materials for them, and they've pivoted to start manufacturing boat parts and boat accessories. I don't know how that correlates, but for them it works. And as long as it brings money in the door, we're happy to see it and happy to partner and try to find some of those solutions.
That's interesting. And I guess for all three panelists now, obviously you've seen how this is, and a testament to what you just recently said, this is going to test tenants moving forward, and we may see, an increase in defaults and hopefully that's not the case, but very likely will be. Is there a different approach now? Say you're signing a lease tomorrow. Are there new clauses that you're looking for? Has your perspective on deposits changed from being one where you would accept the market standard that now you're pushing in more? I know that Ross, you spoke at one point in our interview about how you guys had utilized, deposits when necessary to draw down and pay outstanding rent. Have you guys now approached specifically your lease documents and made changes to that, cognizant of the kind of the new environment that we have moving forward?
I would say definitely focus on security deposits. Has been the main focus for us nationally. Across the whole company, we have, prior to coronavirus, we had an average of 1 month security deposit. So held in cash. In the banks, that's not at all evenly distributed. We have a large, federal government presence, which has zero, so it's not even at all. But in Miami, that number has historically been higher for us. We have a smaller bay portfolio, and those tenants are a little less sticky than some of your bigger build-out kind of tenants. So we've targeted as a steady state average going out ask on security deposit 4 months rent, even before coronavirus in Miami. And if anything, we're more firm on that. And if we have some kind of qualms about the business, pushing up to 6 months. So that weeds out a lot of future potential problem tenants pretty quickly if they can't muster that on a 10,000 foot unit. As far as the actual lease document, we have not changed anything in there. The interesting thing that we're all, I think, tracking directly and also in the back of our minds is what happens with the laws surrounding landlord rights for eviction and other items for bad actors. Moving forward, we've been a very cognizant effort of trying to help our tenants who are genuinely having trouble. We have, more experiential retail kind of focused users and that kind of a thing that they're not going to be able to open. So we're working with all of them, but we have other tenants who, were having problems before all of this. So there's not a lot you can do in your lease document to circumvent laws passed at the governmental level. But that's one area that we're spending a lot of time thinking about how to handle that moving forward.
Yeah, and this recession that we're kind of in and this dip in the economy, this is a lot different than the last go around with the great financial crisis. We have a lot better occupancy, we have a lot better fundamentals, and we have a lot of tailwinds that are supporting our industry. So I think we have the luxury, we're not just getting bodies into our building, we can be a little bit more selective. And I think this whole process has made us a little smarter, asking the right questions and understanding more about our future customers, what their business looks like, who their clients are, and understanding more about them, especially as we partner with them throughout the duration of the life cycle of a lease. And I think the other thing too, outside of just security deposits, it's really important to get landlord references from prior landlords. And we have such a great community here. I'm just starting to meet everyone and learn it, but we're collaborative. Times are pretty good, fortunately, all things considered. So we can pick up the phone and, Ross can call me and say, hey, you guys have this customer. What's their pay history? Should we do business with them? We can have that dialogue. I think there's enough collaboration in this world, and it's small enough that we can feel comfortable having those conversations.
Yeah, and not to repeat, but I think we're all looking at, deposits, letters of credit, even when securitizing a lease, and really focusing on our tenant mix. I think that the recession that we all lived through in 2008, 9, 10, where vacancy was very high and we were losing tenants left and right, I think it was great preparation for this. And I think that actually teed up, maybe some of our hopefully future success in getting through COVID, in that, we've been more focused on our tenant mix, the credit of our tenants, and really looking at, how sustainable their businesses are going to be through something like this. So I think landlords are being more selective, and I think tenants are even being selective about who they're partnering with on the flip side, knowing that they're with, a well-capitalized landlord who can, continue to pay the real estate taxes and the power bill on the site, and can deliver for their needs. So I think it kind of goes both ways. And then regarding sort of lease documents and things like that, I think everybody's probably looking at incorporating new force majeure language, because, you know, when we're looking at delivering buildings or spaces to tenants, and we've got municipalities who are shutting down, and you know, it's taking a lot longer to get building permits and tenant finish permits. When people have timelines that they have to meet to get into a space, we have to be very mindful of the fact that this pandemic situation is sort of delaying everybody on delivery. So that's just kind of some of the stuff that we're looking at internally.
I really like that comment about the our tenants and our customers being a little bit more selective too. I think for the first time in history, we're seeing tenants and companies leasing space and taking space that they've never stepped foot in. So they're having outside vendors do evaluations of the buildings, and you can't do that with just a one-off property owner. You really need to partner with a reputable landlord. And you know, I look at my partners here, and I think they probably get that trust from our groups and can lean on our reputation a little bit.
Yeah, I agree.
That's great and very interesting. And Ross, I have to tell you, it took all my self-control not to mute you when you were talking about 6 months of security. I have clients on this call, Ross. You're killing my deals right here. But kidding aside, moving on to the next question. This one's for Stephanie. So Stephanie, you made reference to it in the beginning of the call, just talking about how you as well as ProLogis kind of put a pause on development efforts initially, but it seems like recently that has changed. You guys announced, and we actually just went to a broker event for Miami 27, that 750,000 square foot project that you guys are launching. Any, you know, what caused that shift from the perspective of you guys deciding we're going to put a pause to moving forward with such a large project? And is it more having to do with, you know, the holding costs, just letting that sit vacant, or because you see perhaps the Amazon effect and some large requirements coming to market?
I think that at the beginning, you know, in mid-March, when we were all sheltering in place, everybody sort of just said, okay, hold up, let's see, how long is this going to last? And all of our phones were ringing. You know, Jason talked about it. We spent days, hours on end, 12-hour days talking to customers about, you know, their struggles. And we were all, I think, a little worried about what might be coming back to us. I think that we have revised our guidance for development pipeline for the year nationally. So, you know, we're looking at completing probably, you know, up to 425 million in development this year. A lot of that will be, you know, pre-leased, build to suit, and also, you know, in the lower risk tier 1 coastal markets. So that's really our focus when we updated our guidance in the second quarter reporting. But, you know, for us locally, like I said, we went into the pandemic very highly occupied. I think our portfolio in South Florida was around 99% in March. We've had some tenants who expired and, you know, we're planning to move out anyway prior. So we're still backfilling a couple small little tiny pockets in the Tri-County area, but Miami, we're 100% leased right now. And so this past week, we just signed a deal, a pre-lease for 72% of one of the buildings at Miami 27 Business Park. So when that happens, it's full steam ahead, right? I mean, your risk is much lower when you've got 60,000 feet left to lease in a building that's 221. So, so that has helped when we can get pre-leases or build-to-suits on the hook. And there are a lot of bigger users out there looking, as you know, my fellow panelists and people on this call can attest to. I think also, you know, we weren't sure how our rent collections were going to look when we did, you know, we did do some selective deferral agreements with folks early on in the process. And, you know, they've now started to have to pay back on those deferrals, and they have started to do so. And so our rent collections this past month were 99% across our portfolio nationally. So when you're seeing things like that, yes, we might still be waiting for that other shoe to drop, but I think that we're all encouraged by the fact that people are, you know, holding tough right now. And so I think that's, you know, giving us a little shift in the mindset. Now, are we going to pull the trigger on our big 500,000 square foot cross dock? We've got a permit. I don't know if we're importing our pad just yet, but you know, we are talking to some users for that portion of the site down in Medley. So I think that we'll just continue to kind of see how things progress. Deals are getting signed. We're not the only ones signing deals. So as we see that space being absorbed that was delivered maybe in the second quarter, I think it's a positive outlook for us. So that's sort of our little viewpoint.
That's great. And I guess so. My next question is more for Ross and Jason. You know, you guys are not, you know, you don't live here in Miami. You come from other markets. I know, Ross, you've been working this market for a long time. You know, from some of us here on the ground, we're always interested to see how our market compares to others, and if there's any differences to the trends you're seeing in Miami versus, you know, other markets. I know Jason mentioned the cruise industry. You know, obviously we have a strong airport. Could you guys touch a little bit on any differences that you may see between the Miami industrial market and trends you're seeing in other markets? And then kind of as a more informal thing, Ross, any advice that you have for Jason as it relates to doing business in South Florida? I'm sure Jason got some tips and you know, the good spots for the coffee and the people to look out for, but any friendly competitor tips for coming down to South Florida and doing business down here?
I would just say stick close to Sebastian, and if he invites you on your boat, make sure you're ready for a full day of adventure.
Yeah.
But in terms of the market compared to elsewhere in the country, I mean, the thing we've been looking, you know, in our portfolio being just those 6 markets, we have a little narrower view than ProLogis would on sort of a national industrial market comparison. But compared to our other markets, the amount of development in Miami is significantly higher as a percentage of the total base than elsewhere. And kind of there's been more land sort of dug up to be converted to industrial than I think most people expected in the amount of time that it happened. So you're looking 4 and 5% sort of deliveries of the supply each year, whereas my other market, LA, is under 1%. And even on a total square footage basis, with that being, you know, a 1 billion square foot market, the number of square feet being delivered on just an absolute basis is even lower than it is in Miami. So that's one thing we've been very cognizant of. We had our building on 25th Street, the former CGI building, sort of a Class B, good location, but lower clear building. That one struggled a little bit leasing wise compared to some new Class A products. So I think there is an impact more so in Miami, I've noticed, due to the construction. In terms of, you know, how the market's holding up compared to elsewhere in the country, I haven't seen too much of a difference. Honestly, all of our markets have been holding up very well. You know, Stephanie pointed out collections in the high 90s. I think we were 98% in July for collections. So that's pretty consistent, kind of surprisingly, across the whole country. And tenants are paying back any deferments. We've agreed with them. They've mostly been honored, you know, again, waiting for the other shoe to drop. But so far it's been a remarkably steady industrial with, you know, I think one of the biggest trends I'm sure we'll mention at some point is Amazon took something like 46 million square feet across the country in the first half of the year. They plan to increase their rate of lease signing by 50% over the next 12 months. So we're talking another 100 to 125 million square feet absorbed in the next 12 months just from Amazon. And, you know, they're a big factor in backfilling other 3PLs that are going out of business or other tenants that are having issues. That's sort of one of the strong wins, and that's across the whole country. South Florida as one of their main target markets, as you all know. So I think it's been fairly consistent in that perspective across the country in our portfolio.
And from my perspective, I think one of the biggest differences from New Jersey moving down here is the traffic. You know, you guys all complain about the traffic. I've been driving around for 3 months. I don't see any traffic. But no, I know we'll take advantage of it while we got it. But no, to that point, there's a lot of cars on the road and there's a lot of workers, a lot more workers going into our buildings. So I think one of the biggest trends we saw in New York before anywhere else are just these parking requirements for trailers and for cars, and just this fleet management approach. In New York City, we did a deal in the Bronx where we actually got $15 per square foot on the parking. So actually charging on the land. So, you know, I think that will be a little bit slower. I don't think we're going to quite hit those numbers anytime soon, but I do think we'll start to see more and more of those parking requirements start to come. And, you know, we've seen on a couple buildings where we've had maybe 2 pad sites to develop a building, where we'll develop one building and use the second building just for car parks. So we're seeing more of that, and I think there's just going to be more to come in the next few years.
And going back to you, Jason, I'll have you kind of start with this question. You know, there's 2 concepts that prior to COVID seemed to be kind of the trendy sort of interesting discussion topics in our industrial meetings. And one was perhaps the new design that we're looking at of 2-story warehouses. It seemed that was a very popular discussion. My first question would be, do you think that sort of revolutionary type of design will be delayed because of this? Because perhaps, you know, with such high cost of construction with that type of building, is that something that perhaps people are going to wait for? Or are they going to perhaps jump, you know, faster towards it with, like Ross mentioned, the tremendous amount of demand coming from Amazon and other, you know, potentially other e-commerce users?
Yeah, so I don't think it will be delayed. You know, I mean, I think the whole market and economy is in a state of delay for the next 12 to 18 months. But I think that multi-floor, you know, multi-story warehousing or parking, you know, I think that was probably still 3 to 5 years out. So ultimately, I think if anything, this will help accelerate some of those things, and some of the tailwinds will help us get to faster rent growth in the long run. And that's what we need, because these multi-story buildings, they don't pencil unless you have deals in kind of the high teens to low 20s. And that's only going to happen in certain areas that are extremely dense and don't have the access to land. So in such a land constrained market, I think eventually we'll get there. But, you know, I think we'll see more of it happen on the parking side, where we may look at some buildings and evaluate parking on the roof. And you know, monetizing some of that land parking that I talked about. So I think we'll see that trend hit first before the multi-story warehouses. But again, we got to get high rents to support those numbers in the underwriting.
Got it. And I guess as a follow-up to that, you know, the other concept I was going to mention was perhaps, you know, the death of big box retail. You know, that's kind of been something that, you know, unfortunately, it looks like it may be more reality than ever. And something that some people have mentioned was perhaps that big box retail space may in fact become last mile distribution space. So not sure what your guys' thoughts on that. You know, obviously, you know, the function of that big box retail may be detrimental now that e-commerce users are needing more parking, trailer drops, need to turn around product quicker. Do you think, Stephanie and Ross, that there might be any validity to that type of space, especially with its infill location becoming a sort of last mile warehousing sort of operation?
I think you might have a few hurdles to overcome in the short term. You know, a lot of these big box retail locations, you know, is the infrastructure in place to allow for all of the, you know, the truck traffic or the high volume of delivery vehicles or things that, you know, might need to go in and out of those properties. So I think you might have some of those issues to overcome. Neighbors. So, you know, if they're in more residential communities, most residential communities don't want distribution functions right next door. So you might have some pushback from those folks. You know, some people are already doing it. I haven't really seen it hit South Florida. I think what we're seeing more of is some of those big box retailers are using their brick and mortar locations to supplement their e-commerce business. Target's doing it, Walmart's doing it, Best Buy, some of those folks. So I think it's more of a business plan change to use those spaces to fulfill their e-commerce needs and not necessarily convert them completely to a distribution location. But, you know, time will tell. I think we're starting to see, you know, even before the pandemic, a lot of those stores were closing down. You know, big grocery chains closing. And I mean, how many Publix do we need in each neighborhood, really? So, so it'll be interesting to see if those do convert in the next couple of years. I don't see it happening like immediately, but I see more of that shift to using the stores' footprints now as distribution facilities, you know, for their e-commerce support.
Yeah, and agree with all those issues, and I think it is going to be case by case on conversion. But it's, you know, when you look at 5-story Neiman Marcus attached to an indoor mall with no windows, you know, is the owner of that mall going to try to maintain the rest of the smaller stores in there? I mean, it's a really tricky one, and most of the plans I've seen from mall owners is to put a ton of money into converting those, whether it's demo entirely of that big box component retail and building, you know, housing and different things, or trying to convert the structure itself to a more experiential kind of thing. It's a really tricky environment to navigate for those buildings. I have, you know, it does work though. There's been a couple examples down in LA, one of a Costco and one of a Fry's electronics store, being, and you know, with huge parking fields for customers. Those are standalone kind of big box retail as opposed to part of attached to a mall kind of retail. Those are both converted into Amazon last mile. You know, there's one dock door, they drive the cars in, and they have enough parking for, you know, thousands of their Sprinter vans. That is happening, and that will definitely continue. It's a relatively low impact trucking use because you're dealing with the smaller local delivery guys, and you're standalone away from, you know, other components of a mall. So those, I think, are the easy ones to convert. Certainly the location of these malls is great for industrial, but, you know, we get enough pushback in industrial areas trying to bring a trucking heavy use in. I can't imagine the city council meeting when you're trying to push 18-wheelers coming through a neighborhood that's typically residential. So there's some tricks around getting that done for a lot of those locations.
That's very interesting. So Ross, just a matter of time before you start looking at mall deals and underwriting warehouse rents, huh?
You know, those kind of ones, the two I mentioned in LA, you know, they priced extremely expensively when they sold. So, you know, for that reason, mostly we haven't done one yet. But you know, there's a lot of similarities between a low covered kind of big box retail store and a really infill warehouse. So that line's getting more blurred as people go more infill. Very
interesting. And so my next question has to do with construction costs. It's a very popular discussion here, and I see Tracy Miller, and I'm lucky it's a Zoom call because she can't throw a tomato at me. But obviously on the ownership side, we're always racking our brains as how do we bring these construction costs down? How do we deal with them? I know that for the GCs, their subcontractors have become very expensive down here in South Florida. Do you think that we may have a softening and a decrease in those costs, or do you think that higher construction costs is just something we should expect? You know, on one hand, perhaps there's less development, but on the other hand, I know that in some of the CISF talks we've talked about, now you have to have multiple shifts in construction. You have to be cognizant now of you can't have the plumber and the lighting guy and the racking guy perhaps in the space at the same time. So do we think that there's any chance construction costs are going to go down, or are we continually going to have to underwrite higher and higher TIs moving forward?
I can chime in on this. I had a conversation 2 weeks ago with our senior VP of construction at Duke and asked the question, do we have, you know, have we seen any changes in pricing? And the answer was no. It was way too soon to say that we were seeing any impacts that would help us. I had read an article recently that somebody cited 1% savings from where we were pre-COVID, but we haven't seen any dip. If anything, I think people are busier lately. Even with slowdown in development, people are still doing deals and there are projects still fully, you know, underway. So we haven't seen any change.
Yeah, I'm not sure I have too much more to offer on the subject, but you know, our company, we're certainly looking at different services and things that we can leverage based on our scale, almost 1 billion square feet of real estate globally. So certain things like LED lighting, you know, we're working with partners on a national basis. So we're buying down some of those light fixtures, probably 50 cents on the dollar, and they're really top quality light fixtures. So we're looking at things like that we can kind of look at on a national basis and bring some of that local savings to our customers and to our buildings. But you know, not too much insight for you on the local TI side.
Yeah, and, same here. We haven't done too much lately with, you know, our portfolio has been fairly quiet in Miami, so it's been small make ready kind of thing. So we haven't gotten into a large project in a little while. So I don't have too much color on it for you either, unfortunately.
Got it. Well, I guess one last question I have for you, and then we're going to open it up. I think Janice will open it up for questions from the audience. You know, you three are exposed to very high level conversations from the perspective of macroeconomic shifts and your guys' global strategy and national strategy. What do you think we may see in regards to shifts in global trade that could affect our market? You know, we're talking about, you know, we started reading articles about onshoring of manufacturing, increased tariffs. Is there something that you can tell us here on the ground level in South Florida that you think, you know, your own personal theories, perhaps not even that of your guys' organization, but do you think that some of those trends that we're talking about will affect us? And obviously, what will it do for industrial demand down here?
But
I'll try. Go ahead, Ross.
Jason. No, all you, Jason.
So, you know, it's such a tough question. I mean, I think it's really, and this is all just opinion. I don't have a crystal ball, and I read the same news that everyone else does. But I think it all matters who's driving this ship up top, you know, with the election coming up and what that looks like. And if there is a change, I think our approach to China and Mexico will be a little bit different. You know, I do think we're going to bring more things into the United States. I think we're going to look to our partners in South America and Mexico to support some of that manufacturing that's historically come out of China. But for the most part, we don't have a lot of manufacturing within our buildings. We're more distribution centers and a little bit different of a use. So I don't know. I hope that we'll see some of that and just benefit the economy. But I don't think we're betting on that to really support our business. I think we have other tailwinds that are really going to drive the growth.
Yeah, I think that's, you know, Terreno was sort of modeled when it started as, you know, that's a really tough question you asked, Sebastian. So no one's going to really know the answer. We do know, however, that people want to live in these couple locations that we focus on investing, and they're going to need things delivered to them or to their stores that they're using or whatever the supply chain is going to be. There's going to be a last mile or infill warehouse at some point in that component. So our portfolio is mostly designed around that thesis. We're not going to know what the future supply chain of the world is going to be, but we're kind of positioned near places we think that have long-term viability as major sources of demand, both population growth and economic growth. And, you know, in terms of onshoring, one of the things that surprised me, I think the most in this whole coronavirus era was just how finely tuned the supply chain really is. And a little disruption, the ripple effect on that goes extremely quickly all up and down the chain. And I think you're going to have a lot more redundancy built in, especially in the medical and emergency kind of fields, a lot more redundancy and a lot more, you know, storage of space that's going to require more warehousing. You know, for example, we have governmental tenants who they'll lease a 50,000 foot unit and never use it. The plan is, in case of an emergency, we'll need to put stuff here. So it's just empty warehouse that's leased to the government. I think you'll see more of that kind of redundancy getting built in. You know, I'm sure companies like Clorox, you know, I haven't seen a Clorox wipe in a store, you know, for like 6 months now. So they're extremely tied up on their supply chain. And that's I'm sure they're figuring out every way they can think of to fix that for the future. And you're going to see more redundancy kind of built in. I do think, you know, there's this decoupling with China people talk about a lot, and it's certainly happening very quick. You know, being in the Bay Area, Silicon Valley, in the tech space, there's been sort of a consensus that The open book, open kimono with China hasn't been working as well. And so from a tech and idea perspective, that's decoupling is happening fairly quickly. From a physical infrastructure and manufacturing, if it does happen, it's going to take a lot more time. I think, the West Coast ports, especially LA, are going to continue to be a major inbound for, if it's not China, somewhere else in Asia producing, actual manufactured goods. And I do think also it's going to benefit, this coronavirus is making people up to a more resilient supply chain being needed.
I really don't have anything to add to that. I mean, I agree with everything that Ross and Jason have said. I think that reshoring of manufacturing, I think it might come to North and South America, but not like Central America, Mexico, Latin America, more so than the United States, just because our labor is too expensive, right? It's hard to pencil those numbers out. So I don't think we'll see a big impact on that, especially in South Florida. We might see it in, Texas, maybe the Midwest, some of those other markets, but not so much in this market. The supply chain redundancy is a big driver, I think, for demand in the future. And then, I think the other thing we can think about is with the shift to e-commerce purchasing, reverse logistics is going to be another market driver I think we'll see in South Florida. As people continue to buy online, it may not have supply chain issues, but that's something else we have to look at to, help support demand in this market in the future.
That's great. Well, thank you for the clear answer to a tough question. I know it wasn't a layup to leave you guys with, but with that said, Janice, would you like to open the floor up to our audience for questions? I think we would do a raising hand, pretty simple, but go ahead, Janice. Janice, you're on mute, I think.
So thank you all for a terrific panel. Cheers. And we would like to open this up to questions. So if you have a question, can you unmute yourself and the floor will be yours. Or raise your hand so that the administrator can unmute you. Any questions from the group?
I would say that very thorough questions, Sebastian, and well done. So from a construction standpoint, I just wanted to comment because Sebastian brought it up and I did put something in the chat. We aren't seeing any changes in the numbers. We've had a few people who, slowed down work, of course, when March came, and they've restarted it. And even after 3 or 4 months, they, kind of want to check prices again. And we haven't seen any change. They haven't gone up, but they haven't gone down either. And I know there's been some expectation for that. I think we only have one project that was slated to, that had actually started. We've only got one thing that hasn't come back in full. Everything else that was delayed or temporarily stopped has come back. And that's obviously good news for us in the development arena. I think in the future it might get a little tighter. And hopefully what you all are saying that you've got infill, that's good because then you'll need more space. Because we are seeing a lot in pre-construction. We would normally be a little busier right now with that work that would be starting in 12, 18, 24 months. And we don't have much of that as the pipeline's a little slim there. So if you have anything, let me know.
I do have a question. I do have a statement I wanted to make. This is Mary DeBell from Summing Properties. When you're talking about securitizing your leases, we made a corporate decision a few years ago, so it's not COVID related, but it certainly will benefit us, we believe, through COVID, is we've gone away from, for the most part, cash security deposits. Because on bankruptcy, that security deposit isn't our asset, it is the asset of the corporation. It goes back into the trustee's purse to be distributed out. And we've switched over to letters of credit. The courts have adjudicated that the landlord can have up to 1 year's worth of an LC's value, 1 year's rent in the LC and retain it as its own access in terms of a bankruptcy, someone going out, and not have to have that funds go through the bankruptcy court. So unless it's an A credit tenant, we have, for the most part, switched over to letters of credit just for security reasons. Unless it's a no TI, minimal broker kind of, we're not putting much money out. But if we're putting money out, that's been the shift we've made.
Yeah, we've done the same.
Any other questions from the group? Thank you for those comments. Mike?
Yeah. Thank you guys, Stephanie, Ross, and Jason for your time. Very informational. Mike Jones, I'm with Fairchild Partners with Sebastian Jose. I just had a quick question about PPE tenants that have come to the market recently. Do you guys have any caution with them? Because realistically, how long could the demand be for mask manufacturing, hand sanitizer manufacturing in the next 12 to 24 months? Is that something that's on your radar, or you just kind of, if they can fill the space, we put them in there?
We definitely jump in and try to dig into their long-term viability, both with our existing tenants that are asking for support and new tenants coming into the portfolio. I do think there is a, I mentioned Clorox, there is going to be a shift to a different way of going through your day. That's going to be more permanent than not from a cleaning standpoint. So, if someone's just making face masks, that might be a little shorter term of a bump, but I think there's enough room to run from where we were to where we will end up, that there's going to be demand to support those businesses for, the next 24 plus months.
I can chime in. We haven't really seen new users to market with, the manufacturing of PPE or things like that, but we've had some existing customers who may have manufactured other things. I have one in Broward that they make body armor for the military and the police. And, all of those agencies that they have contracts with have come back and said, can you make face shields for us? So they've sort of done this temporary uptick in this new product line, and they've done some short-term deals with us where we might have just gotten a space back and didn't have a long-term prospect on it, where we've done a short-term lease, 6 to 12 months with them, where they've set up those manufacturing lines in that space to kind of get us through this real critical time in the pandemic. But overall, we haven't seen a tremendous demand for new manufacturers to market for those items.
Great. Well, I guess it's 3:03. We're 3 minutes over time, and being conscious of everyone. Thanks again to the panelists, super helpful. And we appreciate you guys individually having done interviews with us in the past at the CIASF. Just as a quick plug, Janice, if you allow me, we have a developers panel coming up August 20th. So definitely try to make a room in your calendar. It's free 99 to register, as we like to say. So make an effort. And again, big thanks to the entire panel and everyone for helping organize this. And hope to see you soon on August 20th, albeit virtually.